Fantasy Show is presented by E-Trade. Your host, Matthew Berry.
Thank you, Jeff the Fish. We are the Not Ready for E1 players. Coming up today on the show, hey, it's week 13. The rankings are out, so I've got my frequently asked rankings questions. Mike Clay is going to come by to talk about the best wide receiver and cornerback matchups for week 13, plus a big benching in New York. But first, Secret Squirrel, today's show will be...
Oh, that one's hard to read. Cheaper than Cyber Monday, let's say that. The other one's hard to read. Come on.
All right, everyone knows you never give your opponents bulletin board material, right? Well, maybe not everyone. Strawman foolishly leaves bulletin board material for Adam Schefter in the hallway outside of our studio all the time.
Schnurfter is a bum.
But the New York Giants went strawman yesterday by giving the Oakland Raiders secondary a ton of bulletin board material. It was this. We think you're so bad, we're going to start Geno Smith against you. I mean, come on, that's really cruel. It's uncalled for, really. Obviously, you have to feel bad for Eli Manning to end his 14-year tenure with the Giants like this. Much respect, Eli. From a fantasy perspective, you have to feel bad for anyone who has the misfortune of having any Giants on your roster. In the post-Eli Manning world we now live in, look, you're still starting Evan Ingram. Yes, he's been bad the last 2 games. And yes, we have no idea what we are getting with Geno Smith, but still, given the state of the tight end position, he's too talented. Remember, he's still tight end 7 for the year. And it's a strong matchup. It's Oakland, allowing the 7th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Geno Smith is still going to throw the ball. We just don't know how well, right? Now, Smith did have some good fantasy performances during his time with the Jets, but it was primarily thanks to his running ability. Look, it wouldn't shock me if he has a good game here. Raiders have allowed 19 passing touchdowns with just 1 interception. It is the worst touchdown to interception ratio since 1970. But it's week 13. It's win or go home for many in season-long leagues. It is way too risky to consider playing Geno Smith this week, even in 2 quarterback leagues. And with Geno at quarterback being such an unknown, every other pass catcher besides Ingram is still a big risk. We don't know yet if Sterling Shepard will play on Sunday, but if he does, look, he's the best option of a risky bunch. He has missed 4 of the last 6, so does he play the whole game? Even in a good matchup, Shepard, still just a risk-reward wide receiver 3 for me with Geno at quarterback. And New York's passing attack, without Shepard the last 2 weeks, has not been pretty. Giants' leading wide receiver the last 2 games combined, Roger Lewis, 6 receptions for 81 yards. Tavares King, 5 receptions for 84 yards. And Travis Rudolph with 3 receptions for 34 yards. Supposedly, Geno Smith and Travis Rudolph have a connection, but you're not doing anything with it. We'll just have to watch and see. All those guys combined, by the way, a grand total of 33.9 fantasy points in PPR for 3 receivers over 2 weeks. No, thank you. Orleans Darkwa, who's gotten double-digit touches in 6 consecutive games, remains a viable flex play, especially considering the Giants likely want to ease Geno Smith in with a heavy dose of the run game on the road.
Hey, Matthew.
Yeah.
I think it's time, buddy.
I think you're right, buddy. Worse record, more chaos, a lack of fantasy-relevant players, Geno Smith at quarterback. The Giants are the new Jets. So from this day forward, I declare the Jets jar is now the Giants jar. There you go.
Yeah.
We're starting over.
I know.
And here you go, Secret Squirrel.
Yes.
All that money is for you. The Giants jar starts anew. I'm going to need 4 of those pennies back, by the way, because we mentioned a couple guys today.
Oh, yeah, okay. I'm going to go buy a suit. See ya.
So LaDainian Tomlinson, fantasy royalty, right? 9 consecutive seasons with double-digit touchdowns, 3 seasons more than 2,000 total yards from scrimmage. One of the greatest football players of all time. Possibly the greatest fantasy player ever. So if you can get a player who compares favorably to LaDainian Tomlinson, you do it in a heartbeat, am I right? And that's what the 49ers have done by naming Jimmy Garoppolo their starting quarterback. Jimmy Garoppolo, the LaDainian Tomlinson of modern times. Really, I have the numbers to back it up here. Garoppolo, one of 4 players since the merger, with at least 5 career passing touchdowns, 0 career interceptions. He joins LaDainian Tomlinson, who has 7 career touchdown passes, and wide receiver Antoine Randall, who has 6, plus former Packers quarterback Craig Nall, who has 5. All of them 0 interceptions in their career. There you have it. It's obvious, right? Garoppolo, LaDainian Tomlinson.
Or is he Craig Nall, Matthew?
Why do you have to be so negative, Bummer Squirrel? I'm trying to do something for the 49ers out there. But fine. I'll humor your negativity by saying this. Garoppolo's inherent LaDainian Tomlin-ness aside, I don't think anyone should go out and start Garoppolo this week in fantasy. Maybe he's an option in super deep leagues or 2-quarterback leagues, and definitely a player to add in keeper leagues or dynasty leagues, but starting a guy in fantasy with 2 career NFL starts who plays for a bad team and will be on the road in Chicago, where the Bears allow an average of just 13.8 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks when they're at home in Week 13? No, sir. I do not love that. Look, I do think Garoppolo's passing ability will elevate the play of Marquise Goodwin, maybe George Kittle if you're desperate at tight end, but hopefully you have better options than them. Other than Carlos Hyde, there isn't a 49ers player who is likely to help you get into the playoffs this week, regardless who is playing quarterback for them. And yes, even if it's the great Craig Nall. Falcons running back Devonta Freeman has been out since early in Week 10 with a concussion. But it was announced today that he's cleared concussion protocol. He'll be back in the lineup Week 13 against the Vikings. This is obviously great news for Freeman, but from a fantasy perspective, not the best of news for those of you who have Tevin Coleman on your rosters. During Freeman's absence, Coleman has been nothing short of terrific. He scored 3 times, averaged 16.8 fantasy points per game. Good enough to make him RB6 over a full season. But I believe those days are over right now. Freeman moving back into the top role among running backs in Atlanta. And while it has been a bit of an up and down year for Freeman, the Falcon offense is, wait for it, rising up. 3 straight games, the Falcons have scored at least 27 points. And over that 3-game span, Falcons running backs produced 351 yards from scrimmage, including over 100 rushing yards per game, 4 rushing touchdowns. Yes, it is a tough matchup with Minnesota, but at home, on a surging offense with at least 15 touches, Devonta Freeman returns to be a mid-tier RB2 this week for me. Tevin Coleman, merely a low-end flex play. So welcome back, Devonta, and go Falcons. I stand here every day and try to make you a smarter fantasy player and a much dumber person. But I realize many of you may have tuned us out in recent weeks because your fantasy team has been eliminated from playoff contention. And to all of you out there like that, I say 2 things. Number 1, bummer. And number 2, don't give up. Keep setting your lineup. Keep working that waiver wire. Keep trying to win. Why? Because some sort of nonsense about fantasy etiquette or integrity or never giving up or whatever? No, not at all. The reason is this, okay? When the chips are down, playing the role of spoiler can be fun. Just ask the bearer of bad news.
Hey, Squirrel, what do you got there? Lunch or something?
Hey, buddy. Yeah, thanks for asking. This is a delicious turkey and cheddar baguette that I am going to eat.
Not anymore, you're not. Ha buzzing.
Are you kidding me? That was my lunch.
All right, maybe the bear gets too much joy out of playing spoiler. So if you're a positive person, look at the flip side of playing spoiler, right? By setting your lineup and picking up players off the wire, you can actually help a different 6 and 7 team into the league that is on the playoff bubble. By crushing one person's dream, you're actually helping another. You owe it to everyone in the league to keep trying to win, all right? So, Hungry Squirrel, I turn to you, someone who is very much on the playoff bubble in our show league.
I appreciate that.
I'm not, because I crushed you. I'm in first place, but you're on the bubble.
Yep.
So I just want to ask your opinion on this. What's your viewpoint on fantasy teams that are out of it playing to the very end?
Always play all the way through, because here's the thing. Half the joy is being able to say, you know what? I stand between you and a chance to get into the playoffs. And if you can't beat me, then you're no better than a 3-7 team. Not that I'm 3-7 in any leagues. I'm just a random number. I'm
sure.
You know what I'm saying? So that's it. That's all.
I do. You know, the thing of it is that fantasy karma is a real thing.
Oh, yeah.
When I was writing my book and I was getting thousands and thousands of fantasy stories, I can't tell you how many people said, like, they tried to get cute and they'd bench their team so that they'd get a seed against a better team going into the playoffs, or they'd try to lose, or people that weren't setting the lineups. And I have to tell you, it always comes back to bite you. Teams that got cute into the playoffs and they lost their last game to get a better seed in the playoffs end up losing in the first round. I'm telling you, play it straight up. Don't mess with the fantasy gods.
I didn't know you wrote a book.
I'll have to get you a copy, my friend. Coming up next week, or next, I should say, my Week 13 rankings are out, which means it's time for strangers on Twitter to berate me for my opinions. Here's an opinion for you. I think you should stay tuned for our discussion on Week 13 player performances.
Matthew, time for your frequently asked ranking questions for week 13.
You know what, Secret Squirrel, before you start, just real quickly, before the break, you were asking, oh, have you written a book? I have. It's called Fantasy Life in 2013. It was a New York Times bestseller. A couple of months there on the list. Here, I have a copy for you. Yes, that is for you, my friend.
There are so many words.
Absolutely, did very well. It's available on Amazon, wherever books are sold. So, yeah.
I will read this
Enjoy
sometime in the next 15 years. Listen, first question. Bucs reporter Rick Stroud says Jameis Winston will practice today and is expected to take all of the first-team reps. Barring a setback, he will start Sunday at Green Bay. So, where will you rank Jameis this week?
Yeah, you know what? I have him as QB 15. Jameis Winston has struggled so far this year. It's great news for him and that Buccaneers offense, and I get it. It's a good matchup at Green Bay. But weeks 2 through 8, when Jameis Winston was fully healthy, played the complete games, just quarterback 17 on a points-per-game basis. Like, he hasn't been great this year. He has certainly struggled. And so in week 13, with so much on the line, his first game back, even in a good matchup, to me, he's only a mid-tier QB2. By the way, his coming back does help out Cameron Brate, however, tight end 4 weeks 2 through 8 on a per-game basis. I have him as a top 10 tight end this week. Who's next?
Next question comes from Jeremy, who tweets, I need help bad. McCown versus the Chiefs or Keenum at Atlanta. Hashtag FF now. This is a must-win for the playoffs. Hashtag dilly dilly.
Hashtag dilly dilly. I like that. Look, I like both guys quite a bit. They've both been playing really, really well. But you see what I have here on the screen. I have Case Keenum as a top 10 play for me. He's thrown at least for 280 yards and at least 1 touchdown in 4 straight games. That is the longest active streak in the NFL. The only quarterback with more of those games this season than Case Keenum, Tom Brady. Since week 3, Case Keenum, quarterback 8 in total points scored. I get it. Atlanta playing good defense recently, but come on. They're not the 85 Bears. They just gave up 283 yards to Ryan Fitzpatrick, Desmond Trufant in the concussion protocol. Who knows if he plays? Yes, I'm a believer in Case Keenum as a top 10 play this week. Who's next?
All right, next question is a tweet. Ricky Seals-Jones or Gronk this week would be a big help. Thank you.
Wait a minute. Really? Somebody's asking me Ricky Seals-Jones or Gronk? Stop it. Come on. Give me a real question.
All right, how about we just
stop it? You're not benching Gronk, okay? Come on.
Let's let Gronk ask a question. How does that sound?
What?
Yo, what's going on, Matty B? It's your boy, Rob Gronkowski.
Hey, Gronk, how are you? Cartoon Gronk, yeah. What's going on?
Yo, so I'm here to talk about my boy, Hunter Henry, 2H. Anyway, he's got the Browns, and I'm thinking, yo, maybe 69 yards, I don't know, 20 touchdowns this weekend. What's your take, Matty B?
Yeah, I see what you did there, Gronk. Very clever here. I actually like Hunter Henry this week. Browns allowing almost 17 fantasy points per game to tight end this season, second worst in the NFL. And you think about Hunter Henry, who's had over 70 receiving yards in 3 of his last 6 games, 5 or more targets in 7. Henry, more than 10 fantasy points, 4 of the last 7. And by the way, he seems to be coming on. Think about that Cowboys game on Thanksgiving. Caught all 5 of his targets for 76 yards against the Cowboys. He has a 93-33 snap advantage over Antonio Gates. In the last 2 weeks, seems like the Chargers are finally saying, yes, it's Hunter Henry. And this is a great matchup against the Cleveland Browns. As you say, I like Hunter Henry this week. I have him as a top 12 play for week 13. Who's next, Secret Squirrel?
All right, next Barry, I got a question for you. Hold on there. So a lot of people really like this Dopp kid, but I hate his stupid guts.
Fair enough. That's not really a question.
Yeah. Why didn't you wait for me to finish? It's called the segue, you dope. Anyway, as I was saying about Dopp, a lot of people like DeMarco Murray, but you seem to hate him. What gives, pal?
Now, listen, I've never met DeMarco. I've actually met DeMarco Murray once. He was very nice. So I don't hate him. I do hate the matchup, right? And I also think Murray has struggled so far this year. Less than 20 rushing yards in 3 of his last 4 games. 6 straight weeks, averaging less than 4 yards per carry. Honestly, Derrick Henry, to the eye test, has been the better running back for Tennessee. And then you think about the Texans defense. That has allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to running backs this year. Texans have allowed just 3 rushing touchdowns to running back this entire year, tied for fewest in the NFL. Now, I know they gave up a couple on Monday night, but boy, oh boy, that Tennessee offense just seems like such a mess. For me, DeMarco Murray outside my top 20 this week. After the break, Mike Clay is going to stop by to talk about the best and worst Week 13 wide receiver cornerback matchups. It will be the most explosive TV segment you'll see all week. Why? Because we used a bunch of explosive animations. Stay tuned. That is right. Mike Clay is here to talk about the receivers with the best and worst matchups of the week. All right, Mike Clay. Marquise Lee had a tough matchup last week against Patrick Peterson. Things get easier this week?
Yeah, so if you are scared off by that matchup, you don't need to be, because life will be much easier. He's actually going from one of his hardest matchups of the season to one of his easiest, and he'll go up against the Indianapolis Colts. Now, they did have Vontae Davis. They had Rashaan Melvin on the perimeter earlier this season. They're both gone. One's out for the season. One is no longer with the team. So now it's Pierre Desir. It's potentially Quincy Wilson, the second rounder, who's been a healthy scratch a lot of this season. Kenny Moore, obviously not household name. So a big edge here for Lee. He lines up on the perimeter about 90% of the time. They've given up the fourth most fantasy points. 2 perimeter receivers this season. You should fire up Lee. And deep sleeper, D.D. Westbrook. Everybody wants that guy to break out. He's a good matchup.
Yeah, this is certainly the week that could potentially do it. Bortles certainly seems to only have eyes for Marquise Lee. Speaking of somebody who only has eyes for a guy, Brett Hundley only has eyes for Davante Adams, and certainly a nice matchup this week against Tampa Bay.
Yeah, target shares through the roof for Adams since Aaron Rodgers went down, and good sign for Adams that he's a legit good long-term player. Playing well regardless of the quarterback position. And this week, a great matchup. And there's some question marks who exactly will be on him, and the reason for that is Vernon Hargrave's health. Now, if he plays, it's going to be one guy. If he doesn't, it's another. But either way, it's going to be Ryan Smith or Robert McClain on that side. Most of the time, both of those guys have struggled in coverage this season. He will see a little bit of Brent Grimes in this game, but not as much as Jordy Nelson. So it is a great matchup for Adams. We've picked on the Bucs secondary a lot this season for a reason, and now they're missing guys with injuries. It's a great play.
It really is, and it was nice to see Brett Hundley play well. Forget just the volume. It was nice to see Hundley play well, legitimately play well last week at Pittsburgh. Home game now for them against the Bucs. All right, so those are some tough ones. Let's talk, or easy ones, I should say. Let's talk about some tough ones. Marvin Jones seems to be matchup proof. He burned Xavier Rhodes last week, but another tough one this week at Baltimore.
Yeah, there's nothing like saying a guy is a tough matchup and then him going out on national TV when everyone's watching and going off, right? Well, that was the case for Marvin Jones on Thanksgiving. But remember, process over results. Don't get stuck in recency bias.
Yes.
The exception's not the rule. I could go on and on and on. But the fact is he has another tough matchup. And throughout his career, he has struggled when he's facing top cornerbacks. The Ravens allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points to perimeter receivers this season. That's where Marv lines up about 90% of the time. So it's going to be a very tough challenge for him against Jimmy Smith and Brandon Carr on the other side. So it's definitely a reason to downgrade him. I think he's played well enough that he's still in the receiver 3 flex discussion, but DFS cash games, I'd stay away for sure.
Yeah, and also, by the way, remember Matthew Stafford dealing with that ankle injury. He may not be 100% road at Baltimore. Now, traditionally, when Julio Jones has had this crazy big game, he's actually struggled the week after. Maybe that happens again this week off the 50-point game?
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of interesting. We just talked about Marvin Jones' big game. That came against Rhodes, who, might seem, maybe he's not that good. He is very good. He has been terrific for years now. Even earlier this season, he shadowed quite a bit, and he's been terrific in that shadow coverage. Julio Jones, I mean, yes, he's had his ups and downs this season, obviously coming off maybe his best game, one of his best games of his career, let's be honest.
Sure, of course.
But this is going to be a tough challenge against Minnesota. And actually, these two have faced off. In 2015 and 2014, Rhodes shadowed Jones in both of those games about 2/3 of the time, and Jones totaled 138 yards and no touchdowns in those 2 games. So Rhodes has already had success in the past 2 matchups. You definitely downgrade him, avoid in DFS. Season-long list, we know you're starting Julio Jones.
You have to start Julio Jones acute, but yeah, if you're playing DFS, maybe look elsewhere in a cash game. Thank you, Mike Clay. Time now for Make History, presented by Jim Beam. Okay, in the last 10 years, right, there are only 5 instances of a quarterback scoring 24 points in 4 straight games. Matt Forte, Leigh Bell, Devontae Freeman, David Johnson, they've all done it. This year, the only one, Saints star and friend of the fantasy show, Alvin Kamara, has done it in each of the last 4 games.
The Fantasy Show is presented by E-Trade, the original place to invest online, and in part by Snickers. You're off your game when you're hungry. Eat a Snickers.
Monday Night Football, Steelers, Bengals. Countdown kicks off our coverage 6 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. Time now for our daily reminder. Don't be this guy. Today's loser lost for the 2nd year in a row. Had to go to work on a scooter in some very fashionable attire, Secret Squirrel.
That's actually not that bad. 2 years in a row, you're a loser?
Yeah.
Wow.
How about the guy that had to film him all the way to work? It's a bad gig, too.